Let me ask you this. What happens when the empire you built, brick by brick, suddenly becomes evidence against you? What happens when every house, every jet, every dollar you ever flaunted suddenly belongs to the government? That's exactly where Diddy finds himself right now. The same man who once controlled the charts, the parties, and half of Hollywood's attention has officially agreed to hand over a list of assets to the federal government. And while it sounds like just another headline, rapper gives up property, this one hits different. Because the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This isn't about a few laptops or phones. This is about control, leverage, and the quiet dismantling of a billion-dollar empire. According to federal filings, Diddy has consented to forfeit dozens of electronic devices, phones, computers, hard drives, all collected from his multiple residences in Los Angeles and Miami. Investigators say the haul was massive. Nearly everything digital in those homes was tagged as evidence. Even his children's gadgets were reportedly swept up in the raids. But here's the catch. What most people missed is that the Department of Justice deliberately kept the right to pursue additional forfeitures later. That one small clause changes everything. See, in cases like this, forfeiture isn't just punishment, it's strategy. If prosecutors can trace even one illegal act, any link between Diddy's alleged freak-off lifestyle and the use of his homes, cars, or private jets, those assets can legally be seized under the Mann Act. This century-old federal law, once abused for moral policing, now sits at the core of modern trafficking cases. And while Diddy hasn't been convicted of that charge, the statute allows investigators to label any property used to facilitate such acts as tainted. Think about that for a second. If a single jet trip, hotel suite, or rented mansion was used to move someone across state lines for an illicit purpose, that property becomes fair game. It doesn't matter if it was bought with clean money. The government only needs to prove it was used for something dirty. That's why the words facilitated acts keep showing up in court filings. And that's also why Diddy's attorneys are panicking, because some of those houses, especially the Holmby Hills mansion that agents raided last year, were allegedly central to his most controversial gatherings. If investigators can show that any of those events tie back to criminal behavior, the mansion itself could be claimed as government property. The same goes for his private jet, luxury SUVs, and studio spaces. Anything used as a setting, even once, can be labeled a facilitation property. So while the headlines talk about devices and computers, insiders say the real target isn't what's on those drives. It's what those devices connect to, an entire network of money, movement, and misconduct. If prosecutors can link those electronics to Diddy's corporate accounts or travel records, the forfeiture expands. The empire he built through Bad Boy Entertainment and Combs Enterprises could slowly collapse under financial tracing alone. In short, this isn't just about taking Diddy's toys away, it's about cutting off the power supply to his influence. And the irony? For years, he used wealth to buy protection. Now, that same wealth might be the reason he loses everything. Here's where things start to get really ugly for Diddy, and not just in the headlines. The government didn't just accuse him of bad behavior, they proved in court that he used company money to fund it. Yeah, you heard that right. The same corporate accounts meant for music, promotions, and artist payments were allegedly used to cover flights, hotels, and even rent for people tied to his so-called private lifestyle. That means those dollar signs weren't just fueling business, they were allegedly fueling crimes. And here's the thing. Once you start mixing personal pleasure with company funds, you're basically signing your own financial death warrant. Because now the feds can trace every wire, every transfer, every receipt. They already have a paper trail, and if those trails connect the dots between Diddy's businesses and illegal activity, the government isn't just going to find him, they're going to own him. Let's break it down. Under federal law, there are two major categories when it comes to forfeiture, proceeds, and facilitation. Proceeds are pretty straightforward, money or property directly obtained from a crime. If someone sells drugs, scams investors, or allegedly profits from any kind of illegal act, that money becomes fair game. But facilitation is where things get a little more dangerous for Diddy, because it doesn't matter how you bought the property. What matters is how you used it. If prosecutors can show that any of Diddy's homes, studios, or even jets were used to plan, host, or transport people for these alleged acts, that's it. The government can go after those assets, even if they were bought legally years ago. Imagine that, a $40 million mansion being tied up in a forfeiture case, not because of how it was paid for, but because of what allegedly happened inside. And the Mann Act makes it even easier for prosecutors to do just that. It's an old law, born in the early 1900s with some dark racist history, but today it's the go-to weapon for modern trafficking and coercion cases. Basically, if someone crosses state lines for any illicit reason and another person helped organize or fund it, the feds have jurisdiction. And with Diddy's lifestyle, private jets, multiple homes across different states, dozens of staff and guests, every trip becomes potential evidence. This is why Diddy's legal team is sweating right now, because the feds don't need him to be convicted of trafficking to trigger forfeiture. They just need a link, one financial thread that shows company funds being used for acts covered under the Mann Act. And if they can make that link, even indirectly, that opens the door to civil forfeiture, meaning the government can start seizing property before any new conviction even happens. And you better believe they're looking. Those electronic devices they seized, the phones, laptops, and hard drives, weren't taken just for show. Federal analysts are digging through them for messages, flight logs, payments, or any clue that connects his properties to criminal activity. And let's be real. If you got as many phones and computers as Diddy did, there's a reason. People don't juggle that many devices unless they're trying to keep certain things separate. So while fans are arguing online about whether Diddy deserves a second chance, the feds are building a case that could strip away everything he owns, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Because in the eyes of the government, if the crime touched it, they can take it. And right now, it looks like Diddy's empire wasn't just built on music and business deals. It may have been built on things a lot darker. Here's where the story really starts to sting, because this isn't just about money anymore, it's about property. The language in Diddy's agreement makes one thing very clear. Anything, any home, studio, residence, or even parcel of land that was allegedly used to facilitate the crimes can be seized. And that one little word, facilitate, is doing all the heavy lifting here. It means that if prosecutors can connect the dots between Diddy's properties and his alleged activities, the Department of Justice can go straight for the real estate, not just the bank accounts. So it's not about how expensive the house is or who technically owns it, it's about what it was used for. And here's the part that really gives the feds power. They don't have to prove it right away. These investigations take months, even years. They can circle back later, once the digital evidence, testimonies, and flight records all line up. Then, if they can show that a residence, a studio, or even one of his yachts was used for illicit or exploitative activities, and it becomes a facilitation property under federal law, from that point on, it's automatically forfeitable. It doesn't matter if Diddy bought it 15 years ago, legally, with clean money. The moment it's linked to illegal conduct, it's considered contaminated. So when Diddy signed that forfeiture agreement, he wasn't just giving up a few devices or cash, he was opening a door the government can now walk right through. He can't block it in certain legal contexts anymore. The feds can go after any property connected to those acts as long as they can prove a link. And given how connected Diddy's personal and professional worlds were, those links might not be hard to find. Let's take one specific example, that lease under Jane's name. Federal prosecutors could take over that lease entirely, claiming it was used as part of a larger criminal network. They could say, this place was rented with dirty money, this was part of the operation. And once that argument sticks, it's over. But the real problem, the money trail. In court, prosecutors showed that Diddy used business accounts to pay for flights, hotels, and even reimbursements tied to illegal activity. That's a critical mistake because once company funds are used for criminal purposes, those funds and everything they touch become tainted. Now, imagine this scenario: a so-called freak-off happened in a luxury Airbnb. Maybe it wasn't at his mansion, maybe it was somewhere rented for the night. That doesn't matter. Under federal law, that rented space still counts as facilitation property if it was knowingly booked for illegal acts. And according to court filings, Diddy personally booked many of these locations. That's probably why, according to insiders, his legal advisors told him to keep those events out of his private residences. They likely warned him, don't use your home. If they prove something happened there, they can seize it. Because if that happens, they can argue that the property itself became part of the crime scene. Even rented spaces can be dangerous. Hotels, short-term rentals, and even studio spaces can be linked back through receipts, text messages, or travel records. And once that happens, it doesn't just hurt Diddy, it impacts everyone around him. His companies, his accountants, even property managers could find themselves questioned by federal agents. So when you look at the bigger picture, this isn't just Diddy losing some luxury items. This is the federal government slowly peeling away every layer of his empire, house by house, jet by jet, account by account. Because once the money and property cross the line from business to criminal facilitation, the government doesn't need sympathy, it just needs proof. Here's where the intent becomes everything. The government doesn't just care about what Diddy owned, they care about how he used it. If prosecutors can prove that he rented or booked a property specifically for illicit purposes, then that's all they need. Whether it's a mansion, a luxury Airbnb, or a hotel suite, the moment that intent is established, it becomes part of the crime itself. Even if the landlord or Airbnb host had no idea what was going on, the leasehold interest, meaning Diddy's right to occupy that space, can still be forfeited. That's how broad federal power is in these cases. It doesn't matter if the property was legally rented or even owned by someone else. If the space was used to carry out or conceal criminal activity, it's fair game. Now think about this. Prosecutors reportedly have receipts, flight logs, text messages, and digital communications. If they can connect those dots to show that corporate funds were used to pay for those rentals, that's where things start to crumble. Because once corporate money touches a criminal act, it turns everything it touches into tainted proceeds. The funds themselves become evidence. And that's what makes this situation dangerous for Diddy. If company credit cards, Venmo, or Zelle transfers were used to book the properties or pay participants, that's traceable. Even if the property itself can't be seized like a hotel or an Airbnb, the money can be. Every transaction leaves a trail, and federal investigators are experts at following it. What's more, prosecutors prefer documented evidence. They want something they can print, highlight, and hand to a jury. Flight logs with names, receipts showing specific dates, text messages with booking confirmations. Those things speak louder than any witness ever could. That's why in most cases, they don't go after the main mansion or the private jet. Those take years of litigation. Instead, they go for the easy wins, temporary rentals, short-term leases, or digital accounts directly linked to illegal acts. So why does this matter? Because this isn't just about bad behavior. The second Diddy used his company accounts to finance what prosecutors classify as criminal acts, he crossed a legal line. That transforms everything from a moral scandal into a federal crime. It means his company wasn't just a business, it was a bullshit. It was allegedly a tool to fund and conceal misconduct. And here's the irony. By using corporate money, Diddy might have made the government's job easier. Personal funds can be harder to track. But corporate accounts, they're subject to audits, records, IRS oversight, and compliance rules. Every payment, every withdrawal, every miscellaneous business expense can now be re-examined. To make it worse, the Justice Department doesn't even have to prove that every dollar was dirty, just that some of it was knowingly used for illegal purposes. That's enough to pull the entire financial structure into question. Even partial involvement allows the government to move for partial forfeiture, meaning they can freeze or seize whatever portion they can trace. And if that happens, Diddy's empire could start collapsing from within. Because when the feds hit your money, your properties, your companies, they're not just taking your wealth, they're taking your leverage. So if you've been wondering why Diddy's lawyers are fighting so hard to contain the damage, this is why. Once the term financial facilitation enters the courtroom, it's not just a rumor mill anymore, it's a paper trail. And that's the one thing Diddy can't charm his way out of. All right, guys, let's finally talk about what the government could really go after, because this is where the story gets financial, surgical, and personal. According to legal experts following the case, the Department of Justice isn't just eyeing Diddy's personal fortune, they're mapping out every corporate account connected to him. And if prosecutors can prove that any of those accounts were used to make payments related to the allegations, whether for rentals, travel, or so-called event coordination, they can freeze them instantly. It doesn't stop there. If a single company asset, like recording equipment, studio space, or even a company vehicle, was maintained or paid for with tainted money, it becomes traceable under the law. That means not just the cash, but the business itself could be seized. The DOJ has the power to move for forfeiture of shares, ownership units, or even whole subsidiaries if they're shown to have facilitated or concealed criminal conduct. And if you think that sounds extreme, just look at precedent. That's exactly how prosecutors dismantled Jeffrey Epstein's network of shell companies and Backpage-style entities. The same playbook being studied now. Once they trace dirty money into a legitimate business, it no longer matters whether that company was otherwise clean. The contamination spreads across the whole structure. What's especially dangerous here is that prosecutors don't need to prove the entire business was corrupt. They only need to show that one account, one transfer, one expense crossed the legal line, and that it was done knowingly, not by mistake. This isn't about accounting errors, it's about intent. So what kind of evidence do they use? Things that seem harmless, wire transfers, QuickBooks entries labeled as travel expenses, reimbursements to intermediaries, internal emails authorizing payments. Each of those can become a breadcrumb leading back to Diddy's financial ecosystem. And when that trail is clear enough, the DOJ can ask the judge to include those accounts and corporate assets in the official forfeiture order. That's when things go from under investigation to locked down. Now here's the part that's keeping Diddy's team up at night: civil forfeiture. Even if there's no new conviction, the government can still file what's called an in rem case, a lawsuit directly against the property itself. It's a legal loophole that lets the feds seize assets while the criminal case is still unfolding. They don't have to wait for a guilty verdict, just probable cause. And if they succeed, Diddy could lose access to millions before the trial even concludes. But the real storm might come from somewhere else entirely: the IRS. If the Internal Revenue Service or its Criminal Investigations Branch, IRSCI, steps in, they'll go line by line through every expense. And the second they find something that looks like a false deduction or a misreported business cost, they can open a tax evasion case. Why? Because under federal law, you can't claim illegal activity as a business expense. You can't pay for personal misconduct with company money and then write it off as event coordination or marketing. That's the smoking gun prosecutors are looking for. If that happens, it's no longer just the DOJ's problem. It becomes a multi-agency investigation. That's the nightmare scenario for any mogul, when the feds, the IRS, and financial crimes units all start working together. So while the headlines might focus on Diddy's reputation, the real danger lies in his ledgers. Because once the government starts connecting the numbers, it's not about celebrity anymore, it's about accountability. You guys, let me break it down. This part is where everything finally catches up. The money, the power, the connections, all of it coming full circle. The funds Diddy allegedly used to make those payments, they're now being classified as forfeitable proceeds. That means every dollar that left those corporate accounts, no matter where it went, is being treated like evidence. And here's where things get dangerous. If investigators can prove that Diddy tried to drain or hide those accounts during the investigation, the feds can hit him with what's called the snatchback rule. Basically, that lets them reverse the transfer, seize whatever was moved, and even put a lien on his personal property, including his mansion. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your home, your cars, and even your businesses are now under federal control. That's the nightmare Diddy's lawyers are trying to prevent right now. And it's not just about losing assets. If any property, even partially, was bought, upgraded, or maintained using those funds, it becomes traceable property under federal law. That means it can be seized too, even if it's technically clean. Once a dollar is tainted, everything it touches is contaminated. Now, let's talk about how serious that really is. Corporate entities, Diddy's companies, labels, and holdings can literally be named as defendants in a federal case. Once that happens, the government can freeze all operations, cut off access to accounts, and even suspend licenses. That's how fast a business empire can collapse, not from a headline, but from a spreadsheet. See, this is why financial crimes are the government's favorite weapon. You don't need emotional testimony, you don't need witnesses, you just follow the money. And unlike people, money doesn't lie. It leaves a trail. It leaves dates, receipts, transactions, and names. That's why prosecutors love it, because it tells the story all by itself. So yeah, Diddy already got hit with the jail smackdown, but this is worse. This is the part where the walls close in financially, where the system doesn't care who you are, how famous you've been, or how long you've been untouchable. Because once the government starts labeling your assets as tainted, your influence doesn't matter anymore. And while all this is happening, insiders say even people close to Diddy, like his longtime associate Tim Westwood, are facing their own fallout. The ripple effect is huge. Every connection, every business partner, every account that moved money between entities could get dragged into the same investigation. That's the reality of a federal takedown. It never just takes one man, it takes the whole structure down with him. So what happens now? If the forfeiture expands and the IRS audit moves forward, 2025 might become the year Diddy finally loses it all. His freedom, his fortune, his legacy, everything could be on the line. And yet, as wild as this all sounds, there's something poetic about it. The same power that once built his empire might now dismantle it piece by piece. Maybe that's karma, or maybe it's just the system doing what it always does, coming for everyone eventually. One thing's for sure though, Diddy's 2025 is looking like a storm he can't dance his way out of. So tell me guys, do you think this is finally the end of the bad boy era? Or will Diddy somehow find a way to rise again? Drop your thoughts below, because one way or another, this story isn't over yet.